Okay, all right. So in this assignment, we are going to be using a Python Lambda function that is going to be triggered by something inside of the S3 bucket. So the very first step in this process would be by creating the S3 bucket. I already have one created, which we will be using throughout the entirety of this demonstration, but here's how you would go about creating that bucket. For the bucket type, you leave it as general purpose, and then you want to give your bucket a unique name. You can just call it lab10 bucket. And then you want to leave all of the default settings as they are for the time being. And then you would click Create Bucket. But like I said, since I already have one, we will be using mine. So as you can see, I already have 3 objects located inside of this bucket, an HTML, JavaScript, and CSS file. And the next thing that we're going to want to do is deal with the permissions. So in order to do this, we go over to the permissions tab, and then we go to block public access. I've already have it turned off, but when you create your bucket, it'll be turned on. So what you want to do is click edit, and then because yours will be turned on, it'll look like this. And then what you need to do is uncheck all of that. So there is public access to your S3 bucket, and then you save those changes, and then it'll just ask you to quickly confirm. And then the next thing that you're going to want to do is include a bucket policy. So that way that information inside of your S3 bucket can be accessed in the first place. So as you can see here, this is what mine looks like. I have one for each of the items inside of my bucket. Now, the next thing that needs to be done is for the Lambda function to be created. Now, I already have mine right here, and that's what we will be using for the sake of this lab, but I will still show you how the process of creating one works. So here we go. You click Create Function, and then you have to make sure to author it from scratch, and then give it a unique name, like we'll just call it My Lab 10 Lambda. And since we'll be using a Python function, you want to make sure that you're using the most recent version of Python, which is Python 3.13. For the architecture, you leave that as is, don't change anything, and then you would create your function. So since I have mine created already, I will show you what that looks like. So right here, we have the Lambda function, and before we continue, I'll just give a quick breakdown of how everything is supposed to work. So the purpose of the S3 client variable is to make sure that everything is in order to interact with the S3 bucket. And then next, you have the event parameter, which is used to store information about the S3 event that will then trigger the Lambda function. And the parameters inside of this event parameter include the bucket key and the bucket object. After this, we have the response, and the response variable is used to get the object's metadata, which includes the object's size. After this, we have the first return statement, and this method deals with returning the size of the object, the name of the object, as well as the name of the bucket that the objects are in. The second one here deals with error handling. So if a file does not exist or if something were to go wrong, that is the message that will be displayed. But in order to test how this works, we need to run a test event. So right here, this is my lab 10 test event. Here it just looks at the bucket. It takes in the bucket name, which is Lynn's lab 10 bucket. And then I chose one of the files in my bucket to look at. So we're looking at index.html. And as you can see, once the test event ran, it was successful and it returned the size of the object at index.html in the bucket, Lynn's lab 10 bucket, is 756 bytes. And then it reveals all the other information down below. But if you try, when you try this initially, there will be an error because there are S3 permissions that need to be handled. So in order to fix this, you need to go to your IAM dashboard, go under, click on roles, and then click on AWS Lambda Basic Function Execution Role. Once you get here, and it finishes loading, you will already be under the Permissions tab, and then you want to click Edit. Now this is what the policy already looks like for the Lambda function. The one change, you leave everything as is, but the one change that you want to make is you want to include this line called S3 get object. And this allows you to peek inside the S3 bucket and actually look at and extract the objects that are inside of it. So once you have that settled, you have to make sure to save it. And then when you try to run that test again, everything should work as it did right here. So the next step after this will be setting up the API gateway. I already have one created here that we will be using, but actually, before we even get to that, the next thing that you need to do is to set up the event trigger. And this is important because the Lambda function cannot function without having this event trigger in place. So the first thing we are going to do is under the properties section, we'll click on create event trigger. And you will want to list the suffixes of each of the files that are present inside of your bucket, because if you do not, the Lambda function will constantly call itself, which can lead it to being in an infinite loop, and that can cost you real money. So list suffixes down here so that way it's only targeting files with those endings, and then you give it a unique name, lab10 event notification. And then under event types, you have to click all object create events. And then as far as a destination, you need to select Lambda function and then choose the Lambda function that you have created, and then save your changes. So now that is all set up. Next, we're going to go to the API gateway. So I already have one created, but I will just walk you through how to do that. Scroll down to REST API and click Build. Click New, make sure it's New API selected. Give it a name like Lab10 REST API. Make sure the API endpoint type is regional and that the IP address type stays as IPv4, and then you would click Create. Since I have one already created, we'll just peek into mine. And next you want to create a get method that will work hand in hand with your Lambda function. I already have one here, but I'll still walk through the steps in order to do that. So under method type, you click on, it's not appearing, but you would click on get. I think it's because I already have one set up. You would click on get, and then for the integration type, you choose Lambda function. And you have to make sure to turn on the Lambda proxy integration as well. Then make sure that you choose the correct time zone or area location for your Lambda function. And then you put the ARN for that Lambda function as well. And then you leave everything as default, and then you create your method. So this is what the get method will look like if you've set everything up correctly. And the next step would be to set a new stage. So go down to stages right here, and then you click on create stage. You have to give the stage a name. We can call it API test. You don't have to put a stage description if you don't feel like it. And then after that, you would click create stage. I already have one created right here. So this is what it looks like. And once you have this stage created, you'll notice that it creates an invoke URL. And that's what you will be able to use to test how well your serverless application was able to be put together. Another way that you can test how well your serverless application is working is by using Postman. And what you would do in that situation is create a workspace inside of Postman and make sure it is set to RESTful API basics. And then you would paste the API's invoke URL into Postman and click send. And assuming everything worked the way that it's supposed to, you will get the same thing that you would get in your test event. So you would get the bucket name, the object name, and um, the object size. But if things don't work how they were supposed to, the next step inside of Postman would be to test and debug to try and figure out what the issue is. Unfortunately, Postman seems to be having some kind of issue at the moment, so I cannot get in there personally and show you how it works. But yeah, those are the steps that you need to take in order to successfully create a serverless application.